Acho que podemos começar. Olá a todos. Hello everybody. As our guest speaker explained in his communication abstract, parenting is one of the most important influences on developmental outcomes. Parenting during childhood is particularly important to promote pro-social behavior and prevent criminal careers and marginalized lives as well. Therefore, early parenting interventions are absolutely crucial. So it is with special excitement that I am pleased to welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Crispin. He is one of the most important specialists in parenting programs. He led the research, development and dissemination of several evidence-based parenting programs. Dr. Crispin is a clinical psychologist and a visiting senior lecturer at King's College London. He has produced over 20 intervention manuals and published and lectured globally. He also advised national and regional governments on this matter. Today, Dr. Crispin will talk about innovative parenting solutions that engage marginalized and excluded families, building evidence and taking to scale. So, applause to
First, you need to find out whether what I say deserves applause, I think. Hola a todos. The rest of my lecture will be in English. Thank you, Professor Miguel, for your generous introduction. It is a privilege for me to work with Miguel and also with Laura, Marcial. Together we are doing extraordinary and interesting work that is highly innovative, I think, in a Portuguese context. It's been a very exciting opportunity for me to be able to come to ISPA and discover the extraordinary work that you do here. And the teaching and training that you're taking part in. This, I should also say, there is an extra part of my delight in being here, because this is the first time I've travelled outside of the UK for 2.5 years. So it's particularly my pleasure to be visiting Lisbon and Portugal, because the country is very close to my heart, and I've visited mainly as a tourist many parts of the country, not just the Algarve, but many parts. So today, what I would like to do is to say a few things about the scale of child mental health need, and I want to make an argument for why innovations in the way that we deliver interventions are really necessary if we're going to transform the futures of our children and young people. And then I will give an example of one intervention that we have constructed, which Laura and Miguel are beginning to create a version of this intervention in Lisbon for testing in a trial. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the additional things that we're doing, particularly in a digital sphere. And I have to finish speaking when, Miguel?
You have around 45 minutes.
45 minutes. So I'm looking for Anna. Could you give me 10-minute warning? Okay, because I will get carried away and I'll lose track of time. Okay. And then there will be time for questions, I think, after that. Okay. So, in many developed economies, the UK, as well as across the UK, the EU and other developed economies, the broad evidence that suggests about half of the mental health problems that occur in adulthood begin during childhood and adolescence. So childhood and adolescence is a key point in which we might try and change the trajectory of those problems that occur later in adulthood. In the UK, like other developed economies, and I should say the UK, I know this is being filmed, isn't it, Anna?
Yes.
Yeah, so in the UK, we have the terrible situation where we have some of the unhappiest children in Europe. But the figures that I'll show you are not unusual across the European landscape. About 1 in 8 children suffer from mental health difficulties that reach the level of disorder, so they would be consistent with psychiatric disorder or equivalent classifications. 1 in 8. And in a classroom in England, a primary school classroom in England would have about 30 children, so that you can figure out the number of children who are likely to have mental health problems in an average classroom. 50% of those kids will have behaviour problems, and for those of you who are involved in some of the master's teaching that Professor Miguel is responsible for, you'll know the trajectory that occurs for those kids in those primary school, elementary school classrooms who've got behaviour problems. You know some of the trajectories into adulthood. Once you start journeying into more socially disadvantaged areas, communities and families who suffer greater levels of social exclusion, the numbers that I've just shown you multiply by 3 at least because of the associated risk factors. So the scale of problems is starting to multiply. So if you think in the UK, an average classroom has 30 kids, 1 in 8 will have mental health problems, so that's roughly 3-4 kids in that classroom in an average area. In a socially disadvantaged area, that's 3 times. So you're not talking 3 to 4 kids, you're talking 9 to 12 kids. And then you think, how can those kids learn because of the behavioural difficulties they have? And then what about the other kids in the classroom? How do they learn with that level of difficulty? And how do we retain the motivation and interest and enthusiasm of the teachers who are there to try and generate learning, but a lot of the time they're having to cope with managing these types of mental health difficulties. And colleagues of mine at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience, where I work, have calculated that by the age of 25, children with serious behavioural problems have already cost the finance ministry 10 times more than an average child. So because they consume criminal justice services, child mental health services, public health services, hospital services, they occupy the police, they're involved in social care and social work. Already by 25, they've cost the taxpayer 10 times more. Furthermore, this is the kids with a diagnostic level of behaviour problem. Kids who've got behaviour problems that don't reach diagnostic level but are still problematic, those kids are 3 times more common, but only cost the taxpayer 4 times more. But if you make the calculation, because these kids are more common, but less expensive per child, they still cost the taxpayer the same level as the kids with disorder level problems. So that's enough from me about the epidemiology and prevalence and the impact. This is one diagram that describes Bronfenbrenner's ecological model of child development, which many of you are now nodding to and will know, and it essentially says how the kids do is both determined by their inherent characteristics, how healthy they are, how bright they are, but also there's a series of other layers that on the outer reach are to do with big structural issues, the economy, the stability, social policy, and so on and so forth, the neighbourhood characteristics that they live in, and then we start getting closer to the child. So what are the family circumstances? What's the quality of housing? What's the quality of employment opportunities? What's the quality of the schools that the kids go to? Then we get a bit closer in, and we start in this terrible diagram that you won't be able to see. You start seeing parent characteristics. How physically healthy are the parents? What's the status of their own mental health? What's the status of their employment? What's the status of the couple relationship? The more conflict there is in the family, the worse the mental health, the more physical health and disability problems, the greater the impact on the next level, which is about the parenting. Because clearly for most children who live in families rather than state care, the thing that wraps around those kids most of the time is the parenting environment, the quality of emotional, practical, consistency, support, and so on and so forth. And clearly, the quality of that parenting environment will be determined by parent characteristics, then family circumstances, then neighbourhood, and so on and so forth. And our rationale, the rationale for most of the work that I do and my colleagues, is that we say, if we want to be most effective at being able to change the trajectory of these kids, particularly kids who are exposed to high levels of risk factors and low levels of resilience, the way that we need to address that is that we need to target parenting as the intervention, as the focus of our intervention. Because if we target parenting, that's an incredibly powerful linkage with how the child then grows and develops. And in doing so, we've not only changed the child's individual trajectory, we've changed the family trajectory. And for us, that's a more powerful intervention approach than simply concentrating on the child. Because if we concentrate solely on the child returns home, it returns to the family environment, and that family environment doesn't change. And this is Jay Balsky's original model of, it's called the Multi-Determinants of Parenting model, which was published a long time ago, possibly before some of you were born, I suspect. And it's recently been reviewed and strengthened by Taraban and Shaw. And this model essentially says the same things as that which I've just said and that which Bronfenbrenner originally postulated. And it does so in a slightly more complicated but more detailed description. But again, coming to the conclusion that whilst these factors play an important role in the trajectory of the child, parenting is central to that trajectory. If I now shift from, those are some background positions that we adopt in our work, and now I want to move on to the broad evidence around parenting. I've said we focus on parenting as a treatment and intervention target, and the great news is that parenting interventions are highly effective. If you look at meta-analyses, systematic reviews, the work of NICE in the UK and other global bodies that assess evidence, they say parenting programs, parenting interventions work, and but there are some problems with them. Given the scale of need that I was describing, 1 in 8 out of 8, between 8 and 12 kids and so on and so forth, most of the families that could benefit from a parenting program don't get one because there aren't enough available. Furthermore, the earlier you try and affect the parenting environment, the more successful you are at being able to change the trajectory of children's development, and the easier the whole thing gets. Problem is, when you've only got a few parenting interventions available that don't meet the scale of need, families are often only receiving those interventions later in the development of their problems, once the problems have become complex and entrenched. And then these programs then become somewhat less effective because you're acting too late and not early enough. I've made the point about the scale of need outweighing the capacity that's available. Often parenting programs, parents don't use them, not just because they're not available, but they haven't a clue how to find one. And so they don't get them. And they feel stigmatized. They feel that if they turn up, they're going to be blamed for being, they're going to be told that their kids' problems as a result of their poor parenting. And I'm not going to be turning up at an intervention that just tells me off for being a bad parent. So there's stigma. And as Laura is always telling me, because of her important work, all of the stuff that I've said so far has largely been developed in the Anglosphere. The parenting programs and the evidence underlying them are largely as a result of research that's conducted in the UK, the US, and Australia. So there's a critical issue here about taking what seems to work with the problems, difficulties that arise in Anglosphere countries and being able to examine whether those same approaches and issues are applicable within non-Anglosphere countries. The other thing that we need to do is that largely, I love Alan Cashman, he's a brilliant US psychologist with enormous insights into all sorts of things to do with child mental health. And one of the things that Alan will argue is that largely our intervention focus, particularly across developed economies, relies on interventions that are delivered one-on-one. They're often delivered by very small, scarce, highly trained specialist mental health practitioners, social workers and the like, and they're often delivered from a clinic base, from hospital or private offices or similar. None of those characteristics are likely, certainly in the UK, we don't have enough money to buy interventions of this type for the population that needs them, so that we need to find other solutions. And Alan has kind of written that said the type of solutions, the type of innovations or interventions that we need to move towards, is to move away from this, that this has got its role, but we need to be able to create innovations that can be taken to scale, that can reach the communities and populations at most risk, that are affordable, which essentially means lower cost, that can expand and use a wider group of people to help deliver the interventions. They need to be more widely available in the places that people typically go, not the special places that people go in terms of clinics and so on and so forth. they've got to work, they've got to be flexible. So a lot of people who do my type of jobs, we create manuals, we write manuals, we love manuals, we treasure them. And then we expect people to simply get on and use our manuals. Well, if I'm sitting listening to somebody like me, I'm kind of going, no, actually, I'm really interested in what you might have written, but I'll do it my way, thank you very much. And that, so that there needs to be a much better understanding from manual, evidence-based intervention manual developers about the way in which their work relates to individual contexts and how those contexts influence and shape the way in which the manual might work. And that's the brilliance of what Miguel and Laura are doing in a Portuguese context. I don't want to over-egg it, but it's brilliant. Cashin is also, Cashin and others have recommended all sorts of innovative solutions, and I'll focus particularly on these two types of solutions, and as I talk further, emphasise the use of everyday settings. So task shifting or task transfer approaches are where people like us, highly specialist mental health practitioners and other practitioners, start sharing their knowledge with other people so that other people can then use what we've developed and tested and feel confident about. They can absorb and use it in their everyday work, and that they then become a powerful ally in growing the quantity of the intervention being available to the people who need it. And I'll describe one of the task-shifting interventions that we've developed. And then clearly, you know, partly as a result of what we've all been through with the pandemic over the last couple of years, but before that, there's a good history of people starting to realise the capacity or capability of the digital space and being able to think about how the digital space can be used to expand the way in which we can share knowledge and communicate particularly to hard-to-reach and excluded populations. Right, so this is a task-sharing, task-transfer model called Empowering Parents in Parent Communities. I'll talk a little, I'll describe a little bit. Anna, how much time have I got?
You have
20 minutes, okay. Perfect. And this is something we've been working on for the last 20 years. I'll describe a little bit about how it works, some of the research evidence, and then some of the work that we're doing together here in Portugal. Essentially, so this task-shifting model we've developed with simply the idea that we've created a manual, manualised parenting intervention, decent evidence, and then we thought we went to very disadvantaged areas in London with high levels of black and minoritised communities, lots of working class communities. And 20 years ago, we went, hey, do you know what we've got? As a bunch of white, middle-class professionals, we've got a great idea that you could benefit from by coming to our parenting group. And weirdly enough, very few people turned up. For the first maybe 18 months or so, we went, typical. We've got this great thing here. These people are not using it. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with them that they don't take advantage of our brilliant idea? And then we did a little bit of developmental trajectory, a little bit of growing up, and we thought, actually, it's not them that are the problem, it's us. We need to reimagine the way in which we can share what we have developed with socially excluded and disadvantaged communities in ways that make it in ways that when they see it, they go, fantastic, God, when can I join up? And the crucial thing which a colleague of mine did was say, well, why don't we recruit parents from the local community? We'll share the manual with them. They can help make the manual a bit better so it suits them and their neighbours, and we'll train them to do it, and we can supervise them, and we can quality assure them, and we can keep an eye on what they do, and so on and so forth. But we'll give it, we will share this. We won't give it away. We'll share this enterprise so that we do community development and an evidence-based intervention. And that's what we've been doing for many years now. And that's at the heart of the Empowering Parents, Empowering Communities model, which is evidence-based parenting program delivered by local parents from disadvantaged communities. And now we have different versions of the program. So we have a version that is suitable for parents who have kids 2 to 11. We have another version for parents whose kids are teenagers, another version for parents who have young infants. And they all follow the same sort of general structure, which is led by 2 community parents, often who've taken part in the program themselves. So they come to the program, they benefit from it, enjoy it, and then go, do you know what, I'd like to try and help make a difference to my community by joining in this enterprise. And it's delivered in community locations, children's centres and neighbourhood places. And we specifically choose to focus on a disadvantaged area and then say, anyone can come. We try and make a very, very big, attractive door so that families, when they look through it, they go, I love that. Again, this is different to the mentality that happens in UK child mental health services, which is we have a very small door that's very hard to find. We want to have a big door that everyone can find. And what we've discovered is that working class disadvantaged people make really sensible decisions about how they use their time. So that people who are struggling go, there's a really big door I want to walk through. They don't go, well, I haven't really got any problems, but I'll still spend like 20 hours in a parenting program. They don't do that. They make use of a really good resource. They use their common sense to choose to get help from a place where they think they can get it, which again in England is people will be going, oh, if you make it very easy for people to use, you'll get lots of people wasting the time and the resource. And this is just not consistent with our evidence. We have gone on to create all sorts of different variations of the program. So we've got versions of the program for parents who've got conflictual relationships, parents who've got kids with autism and Asperger's, kids with ADHD, parents with mental health problems, and so on and so forth. And we've got a whole system for recruiting and training the parents. And I should say that Laura and her colleagues are developing a Portuguese version of this program, which is titled
Ser pai, ser mãe.
Right. So
now you can say it. You also have to say it.
Yeah, you know how useless my Portuguese is. So at this moment of stress, I thought I wouldn't risk making a big error. This is the general content of the program. I won't go into detail about this. Often when I do talks, most people go, that's all I want to know about is the detail of the program, and I apologise that I won't spend very much time talking about the detail of it, but I can volunteer Laura as an expert in the detail of the program. it essentially, the important thing, this is a program designed to help parents manage their kids, particularly the behavioural problems of their kids, more effectively. And we have to bear in mind that parents feel very stigmatised by these approaches. So our starting point is to say, tell us about yourselves, tell us about your lives, tell us about the pressures. We do some exercises that help parents see the way in which their social and family circumstances often leave them depleted. And we emphasise the importance of parents looking after themselves. At no point in all of that process do we mention their naughty children and their bad parenting, because what we want is we genuinely want to connect with parents where parents are at, their lived experience, and we want to demonstrate how we appreciate the pressures they're under. And then we run through things to do with reflective function and communicating emotions between parents and kids. We focus on communication styles more generally and the use of child-led play to help build child confidence as well as reduce the intrusiveness that some parents can take. Then we then we move into helping parents to reinforce their understanding about their children's separate own personal, individual, emotional, social and other needs. Then towards the latter end of the programme, we introduce some of the more typical social learning and behavioural strategies of praise, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and so on and so forth. Some parenting programmes particularly focus on those behavioural and social learning theory strategies. We think our approach is to build a platform of parents feeling that they themselves are recognised and are starting to take care of themselves, help them to think about the bonding and attachment and reflective function, and once they've got a kind of more sensitive, empathic connection about their kids' needs, then they can start to mobilise the behavioural strategies more effectively because they're thinking more about the kid rather than, I just need to punish you. And we use a range of different... The whole thing is not a lecture like this. The whole thing is an interactive process that uses adult learning models and Socratic styles of learning, which say, essentially, tell us about where you're at. We'd love to talk about this issue. What does this issue mean to you? So there's some stuff in the programme that focuses on labelling. You're a bad kid, you're a naughty kid, you never do a thing you're told, your sister's so much better than you are, and so on and so forth. So we want to get to that focus so that parents, let's get to the point where parents are thinking, God, I do slag that, I do say negative things to my children a lot. I want to try and change that style. That's where that bit of the session is going. So we start them by saying, what were the sort of things that you got told as a child? And they'll say things, they'll talk about the negative labels that they were given. Sometimes they'll come up with the positive labels that they were given as a child. You're a high achiever, you're very bright. And then we say, those labels that you were given as a kid, how did they influence you? And it starts revealing for the parents' lived experience of the value and impact that labels can have. And then we use that to then go, so what about with your kids? Do you use any labels? What sort of labels do you use with your kids? And the parents are just much more open at that point because they felt understood for their own experience in being exposed to labelling. And that's just one we've done a lot of this. This slide simply summarised, we've done a lot of this in a lot of different places. So we have, EPEC is run in many sites in the UK, and it's been translated into many different languages. Clearly the most important of which is this last language here. And we've got sites that are developing EPEC across the world, so particularly in East Asia, some Anglosphere countries, but also here in Portugal and in South America and Chile. And the beauty of that is that we see ourselves as a large family. This isn't an intervention developed in the UK that has to drop through and people have to obey. This is a family that contains different family members spread across a community, a worldwide community that can influence and shape what goes on. I'll just very briefly say the story I'm telling you, I hope it touches your heart. I hope you like the idea. You can tell I like the idea. Nice ideas are beautiful things, but they only mean anything if they turn out to have evidence to support them. And we've done a lot of different studies and produced a lot of work, both evaluating the work that we do as well as our colleagues. And particularly in the Anglosphere, there's a group of independent systems that evaluate parenting programs, and they all generally like what we do. I won't dwell upon this. The slides will be available to everyone.
If you tell me to.
I'm very happy for them to be.
Thank you.
Otherwise, we'll be here until maybe 4 o'clock.
Okay.
I'll talk through them all. So essentially, this slide says when we run this program in South London, very high level of black and minoritised families, large number of poor families, not very many middle class families. Essentially, this slide says, and we claim to want to reach out to socially disadvantaged families and families from black and minoritised communities, and this evidence shows that we do successfully do that. And that has been repeated in other geographical locations. The other thing is, if people come, if working class and excluded families come, do they like it? And this is data from a relatively large sample, just over 400 parents. We said, do you like these questions here are different forms of, did you like this? And were you affected by it? And the top rating in the scale that we use is a great deal. And you can look at the numbers here of people. The vast majority of people give the rating the highest rating. Then the next highest rating is given by about 1 in 5. And then there's just 1 or 2 people who give the rating a lower rating. So by and large, I take this as evidence to say not only are we attracting the right sort of people, or the people we want to aim to reach, but when they come, this post-intervention measure says they've enjoyed it and found the thing feasible and acceptable. You can read more about these results in a series of papers that we've published. These are randomised control trial results that show essentially, because of the time available, this is a medium effect size on child behaviour problems as comparing the intervention group with a comparison group. Similarly, we have a large effect size on the intervention group compared with the comparison group, which is a weightless control. And this is parents achieving their parenting goals. So again, we get a large effect size compared with a waitlist control. And those results are published in the British Journal of Medicine, British Medical Journal. This is evidence from, here you've got about 14 different locations in the UK that are running EPEC, because there's a lot of evidence that people like me, if we invent something like a parenting intervention, we do it really pretty well, weirdly enough, because we've got a huge investment in doing it well. When we give it to other people, actually the effects start to dissipate and lower. So we're really interested in, if we give it to other people, how do they do? And we've just in the process of having a paper published which shows that across a selection of 14 sites, whilst there's kind of some ups and downs in terms of this is before and after measures, this measure here, before and after the intervention across 14 sites, and the evidence shows that there is no difference between the achievements within these sites and what we achieve within our RCTs. Right, I'm going to move on from EPEC now in the interest of time. We've got about 5 minutes.
See, what, 10 minutes?
Oh, 10 minutes, I'll slow down. So EPEC is an example of a task-shifting, task transfer model aimed to better reach socially disadvantaged, working class, black and minoritised communities, using a collaboration between specialists and members of the communities. We've realised that although this is a popular and effective intervention, particularly during the pandemic, we realised that the digital space had there were huge opportunities in the digital space for being able to develop very low-cost tools and ways of communicating, particularly with the communities that are of interest to us, and that we've, over the last, I don't know whether it's my phone. Is that my phone?
So, yeah.
Yeah, there's people phoning up with critical comments. They say, you didn't say anything about this and that. So one of the things that I've been working with a group of colleagues, whoops, I've gone over two. First thing, we've shifted EPEC all online. So over the course of the pandemic, everything that I've been describing has now been shifting online. We've been recruiting local parents and training them online, and then enabling them to deliver the intervention online, often using Zoom as the technology for the group. It's a group-based intervention, I don't think I mentioned that. So the whole thing is now available online. And we've also, in the digital space, I'm working with a colleague, Edmund Sanuga-Bark, and others at King's College London, and we've developed an app, a parenting app, and then we've been also conducting a social media-based parenting campaign. Interestingly enough, with the delivery of our online EPEC groups, we've run about, over the course of the pandemic, we've run about 160 plus online parenting groups with some additional workshops, and through that mechanism we've reached probably 1,500 plus parents who would be caring for around 3,500 kids. Because we have a digital evaluation system, they're angry that I haven't answered their question. We're able to compare who comes to the online groups compared with who traditionally comes to face-to-face groups. Are the online groups as acceptable to the parents taking part as the face-to-face groups are? And are there any differences in the outcomes for parents attending an online group compared with a face-to-face group? And you can see from the data that we've analysed so far, there are very little differences overall. So there's no difference in the demography, no difference in the parent acceptability, and no difference in the outcomes. So that during the pandemic, and it's important, I think, to couch this in terms of during the pandemic, it looked like our efforts to transfer the intervention onto digital platforms was successful overall. But what we also were able to do, because we've got lots of sites, we could compare one site with another site and another site to see whether this overall effect of getting the same type of demographic reach, getting the same level of acceptability and getting the same outcomes. And what we found is that different sites over the course of the pandemic varied. So some sites, through their online work, they increased their reach into socially disadvantaged communities, whereas other sites, their reach reduced. Some sites, their level of acceptability got even higher, whereas some sites, the acceptability reduced. So for us, this is really fascinating. It's a great thing for us to know, because the crude question, does online delivery of EPEC work? The right answer is, it depends how it's delivered. Yes, it can, but it depends how it's delivered. This is an app that I just mentioned called Parent Positive. It was developed particularly by my colleague Edmund Sanuka-Bark and a group of people, a fantastic group of people, including experts in human-computer interaction and so on and so forth. And we've been piloting this. So there's a large-scale study of child mental health that's been conducted, collecting data every 6 months over the course of the pandemic to try and track the level of child mental health difficulties within the population, led by Cathy Cresswell at Oxford. And what we've done is we've been able to recruit a cohort of parents from that study who were then randomised into either having access to Parent Positive or not. Parent Positive has got kind of the type of content that you'd expect. It's modelled on EPEC content, so there's some EPEC content on there in what's called parent boosters, and then parents can post stuff, and they can also access resources of one sort or another. And we're just at the point, the trial has closed, so it recruited a large group of people, and this is a kind of preventative intervention, so we're not looking for huge effects, we're just interested in to see how a digital application like this performs in the type of environment that I've described. And it's not particularly seeking to reach the type of excluded populations that I've just been talking about. It's a more of a universal model. And we'll know probably over the summer the type of effects that the app had over the period of the randomised control trial. The other thing that I mentioned a moment ago is that we've been running a digital parenting campaign, particularly on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. And during the the first 12 months, 12-18 months of the pandemic in the UK, we were getting a reach of between 60 and 150,000 parents per month. And this is an interesting thing. This figure of engagement, so that's kind of, it was popping into people's digital streams. Between 60 and 150,000 people the content of the campaign was dropping into their digital streams. And we had an engagement of 15%. So what that means is kind of roughly 15 out of every 100 people were clicking on it to read more or watch more. I've always gone, well, that's not very many. But if I was working for a major corporation, we'd be going 15%. That's an amazing level of engagement. They would be talking about levels of engagement of between 1 and 5%. So there's clearly something attractive about being able to make parenting content more digitally, more available in the digital space. I've got Anna. We're going to finish in a couple of minutes. Can I show one or two of the examples? This is an illustration of Anna and I's collaborative work on the presentations, because I thought I would finish by just showing you a couple of examples of the type of material we've posted on. Yeah, I can see some nods.
Which one?
So why don't we go for... there's one there that's disappeared. I don't know why that's disappeared. Try image 808. See what that says. Fine. So this, if you just pause very... it's got no... Has it got this sound? Well, it can run. It's got a very nice jaunty tune. This is produced on a widely available animation platform called Powtoon, and the focus of this particular post is about stress, parents looking after themselves, and it's to do with sleep, managing sleep in particular. So if we don't worry too much about the.
No, sorry, I don't know what happened.
No, don't worry.
Try clicking on the sound. Yeah.
See, I'll tell you.
Right. Okay. So, do you mind going back to the beginning, Anna? Brilliant suggestion. We're working well as a group now. Uses a different style. Could you do put it on view? Just click view at the top.
This one.
Yeah, view. So I can and do large. That's great. So that one.
This one.
So this is just using a different digital platform called Lumen 5. Different style. to the slide. So a kind of slightly different style of video. So, in summary, next slide please, Anna. Oh no, that's me. Okay, so in summary, the very large scale of child mental health difficulties requires us to look at innovative solutions outside of what we typically do. Parenting programs have a robust evidence base, but they're limited when they're just delivered within specialist practitioners' hands. We've got to, from our point of view, we're examining different innovative solutions to see if they can work at a low cost, generate the type of reach that we want, and still maintain the types of impacts and effects that are absolutely essential for changing the trajectory of kids, particularly kids who live in high-risk, difficult circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. Now we have time for some questions. Nós temos tempo para algumas questões. Quem é que vai começar? Não sei se... Acho que não preciso de microfone.
Não temos. Marcelo. Marcelo, toma.
See, thank you. So first of all, thank you for the very nice presentation.
Thank you.
Regarding this kind of solutions, I always think that to be able to go wider, as you were saying, involves the community. We need to have the community involved. And at least for my way of thinking, I always have the Englishman and the English people as pretty developed mentally.
Have you been to the... sorry.
I've not been in England for like 10 years, something like that.
Things change.
But I've been in Portugal. And in Portugal, I know for a fact that we have a problem there. And the first thing I thought when you were presenting was exactly that big door approach you talked about. I agree 100%, but in Portugal, I feel that it's a long way, of course, and we have teams to do that perfect. But what do you have any feedback on what's going to be the biggest difficulties, the biggest setbacks that you're going to find here? Because I don't believe if you are under budget in England, in Portugal, you will be paying to be able to do something.
Yeah.
And so, having that baseline, how do you propose to go forward with this kind of problem?
Yeah. It's a brilliant question because it is a complex issue, particularly for in the UK. When we see complex problems within communities, we automatically assume that public services need to provide complex solutions, and that they do it in a top-down way. And so probably the biggest issue is a mentality change that says, oh, actually, we could be potentially bigger and better if we do this together, rather than public services feel that they are solely responsible of doing to communities rather than working with communities. So mentality, I think. And seeing that there's possibilities, because the other thing is mentality is connected with imagination, and if people's imagination is really limited to solutions that are focused on professionals, then we hope that being able to offer solutions that demonstrate a partnership, it helps people see other possibilities.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. I don't know if I understood it incorrectly, but the EPEC program that you talked about, was it only for those lower class communities, or was it like open access?
We look to deliver it in particular communities where we know that there are more families with higher levels of psychosocial risk. And then once we have engaged those communities, it's open to everyone in those communities. And because particularly in our cities in the UK, you have very mixed social classes that live very close to each other. So it does mean that some middle class people who live in disadvantaged areas, they can use it, but by and large, the benefit is you get much larger groups of minoritised and working class families using the intervention because they see the big door.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I would like to know if there is any evaluation about the long-term sustainability in parents' attitudes. And the other question is regarding cultural diversity. Do you have any specific tool, or what are the outcomes when you have parents from different cultural backgrounds?
All right, fantastic. So, key question, isn't it, about changing the trajectory? So, we know over the short term, we change the trajectory of parents, parenting, and kids. We haven't done any long-term follow-ups. The wider parenting literature, where programs that achieve similar benefits to EPEC in the short term, where they have done longer term studies, it looks like there's a mix of maintaining benefits, some drop off of benefits, and some reduction in benefits. So I think that the trajectory looks something like this. So I suspect over the longer term, some of the benefits are sustained, but we haven't done those long-term follow-up studies. In terms of cultural adaptation, we have used some of the well-known cultural adaptation models to take the intervention and both do cultural adaptation informed by the new host location and followed by linguistic translation. And that we think the adaptation process has three broad components, one of which is the content that and methods that seem to work in the UK look like they're likely to work in the new host location. A second level where EPEC UK content needs adjustment and tailoring to fit with the new local host location. And then the third level is there's stuff that's missing from the UK version that's required in the new host location. So there's three levels of adaptation, and clearly then that once the adaptation is achieved, we then test and see whether it works, and that's going to affect the type of outcome measures that are then used in the new host location. We're keen to try and maintain at least some measures that we use across the world, because then we can see the performance of the intervention. So I have, as I reply to your question, I'm both thinking about Laura's work here in Portugal, but also colleagues in China who are going through a very similar process at the moment. And they translated some of our measures into Mandarin, but they've also introduced other measures to reflect their local circumstances.
So, probably my perspective is different. I'm an educational psychologist. I teach future kindergarten teachers.
All right, yeah, lovely.
My question is, how can we conceive the role of schools and of teachers in promoting this parenting and how?
Yeah, brilliant. And one of the things that I haven't said at all is that schools are often a very common location for EPEC groups to be delivered, and that the school becomes a source of connecting with parents, so that particularly in elementary schools where many parents will congregate at the beginning and the end of the day in order to drop off and pick their kids up.
Yes.
That's an opportunity for the EPEC parent group leaders will very often be parents in that school, so that they can walk around the playground and talking to other parents about the parenting group that's going to happen in the school, and so that type of outreach is a very positive for us. It's a very positive opportunity for us to connect with the school location and to work with the school, the leadership in the school, and the teachers in the school, so that they know that there's something that can assist them with some of the psychosocial issues that they face in the classroom and in the playground.
Are there any other questions? No? So we can finish for
I have one, but it was kind of answered through another one, because I was very interested when China appeared, because they have a very specific way of interacting with the children, parents and children. So my question is really, what was your perspective of the program there? I don't know if you...
Yeah.
I don't know if my question makes sense.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting to both know, and I suspect by Miguel saying, there are no more questions, are there? It suggests that we need to finish very soon. So I'd be delighted to know about your experience of parenting in a Chinese context. Because I think that's important, and the difference between some of the stereotypes and some of the realities. The second thing is that in our journey for adaptation that I described with to the questioner over there, we've been through that process with our Chinese colleagues, and our Chinese colleagues began by spending 4 months with us in the UK before the pandemic. And really key for me was the cultural adaptation process, so that we'd really having a genuine conversation about how do these ideas that we're talking about from a North European, Anglo-Saxon country, how do they connect with how parents are in Ningbo in China? Actually, we've discovered far more commonalities in the parenting process, some differences in the way that those processes are expressed, so the communication of feeling, the use of reflective function and so on and so forth, may be different, and we've made adjustments, and the traditional models of learning, which appear to be more didactic and less Socratic in a Chinese context. So we've adjusted some of those things, but also our Chinese colleagues have said, we're arguing, oh no, well, we need to make this more Chinese, forgive me, and they're saying, no, actually, these things are really useful methods that we can see how they operate in a Chinese context in the less kind of stereotyped way that I just described.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we can finish.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks ever so much for